You've probably seen pictures of a rising sun or a moon rising, but what about the Earth rising?
There was essentially zero interest in images of Earth from space.
And I must confess that all of us, when we saw the Earth rising over the lunar landscape, said this was it.
We had never had any discussion of taking an Earthrise picture before the flight or during the flight. And yet when we came over the moon on this flight, we looked up and there was this beautiful blue ball in the background. It all struck us immediately. Get that picture. This is the best picture we've got of the whole flight.
Earthrise is the first photograph of our Earth taken by astronaut William Anders on 4th of December 1968 during the Apollo 8 mission. Well, did you know that this, the most influential environmental photograph ever taken, isn't supposed to exist? It all started with a bureaucracy that didn't care about pretty pictures.
What they should have sent was poets, because I don't think we captured in its entirety the grandeur of what we had seen.
1962. Years before NASA adopted the plan for the Apollo 8 mission, NASA never cared about taking pretty pictures. Even though their photography policy was relatively informal, no astronauts were trained to take pictures.
We didn't have any specific directions of the use of photography.
NASA thought cameras were a luxurious waste of space and never awarded them any priority in space missions. During Gemini Mission 4 in 1965, astronaut Ed White became the first man to display a spacewalk. Unfortunately, there were no good enough cameras to record this feat because NASA didn't see cameras as essential. In NASA's early days, they focused primarily on science experiments and data collection. Cameras were seen as secondary objects, and their only considerable use was for capturing images for scientific purposes. They were limited to capturing images of celestial objects such as stars and planets, and were used to document the performance of spacecraft systems and their components.
NASA interest was focused on the mission. And particularly Borman was kind of anti-photography. It was just one more thing to divert the crew to actually completing the mission, which was to go around the moon and get back alive.
NASA was very reluctant to include cameras as a necessity, mainly because of the weight and space constraints. Cameras were seen as valueless weight and were presumed to take up valuable space in the spacecraft. Talk of minimalism. There were also some radiation concerns, but to sum it all up, cameras were not considered to be essential in achieving the priority objective of the scientific mission at hand. One of the mission Mercury's most famous astronauts, John Glenn, also known as the first American to orbit the Earth, played a significant role in convincing NASA to allow cameras on space missions.
Colonel John H. Glenn, he left his footprints among the stars.
And he seemed to be one of the only people at the time who had seemingly grasped the essence of photography in capturing one-in-a-lifetime experiences in the spacecraft and devoted himself to advocating for cameras on spacecraft. Another personality who helped influence NASA photography policies was a test pilot and astronaut who goes by the name Chuck Yeager. Like Glenn, he also recognized the value of cameras in space and also advocated for the use of cameras to capture spaceflight experiences. All advocacy for cameras in spacecraft photography was proving to be quite futile, but this group of rebel astronauts were about to change everything. In the early 1960s, NASA was in search of a reliable camera system for its space programs and missions. They needed a camera system that could withstand the harsh conditions present in outer space, such as radiation, extreme heat and cold, and vibrations. iPhones were still decades away from being made, so it seemed all hope was lost. But by some impure luck, Wally Schirra, an engineer and photographer in NASA, stumbled upon a Hasselblad camera.
Pete and I had talked about getting a good camera, and we looked at the Hasselblad, and I finally got a Hasselblad camera. But before I got it, I talked to Ralph Morris and Carl Meidens of Life magazine, Ken Weaver and Louis Morden of National Geographic. What's the best camera? Hasselblad.
He got impressed by it and ended up recommending it to NASA. That's how a Swedish camera company accidentally became NASA's secret weapon. That's right, Hasselblad has an undisputed legacy as NASA's secret weapon when it comes to space exploration history.
Victor Hasselblad came out with Hasselblad 500C, which was our version, after we made those changes.
Schirra chose the Hasselblad 500C for his mission on Project Gemini and Project Mercury. NASA would then work together with Hasselblad engineers to modify their cameras for outer space, and their collaboration evolved into a long-lasting partnership that endures to this day. The modifications NASA demanded included the augmentation of a camera film to withstand radiation and extremely high or low temperatures, introduction of an electric camera shutter to reduce vibration, camera body reinforcement, and special lenses that were capable of handling the light conditions in space. And Hasselblad obliged, but even with the modifications, there were still challenges that posed a threat to shooting in space. The cameras had to be secured tightly to prevent them from floating away due to microgravity, and this was difficult for astronauts to do while wearing heavy and bulky pressurized suits. What was harder to do was to capture pictures in those bulky suits, and the insufficient lighting in space made it 10 times harder. Lastly, the clock was also ticking, so there was limited time for photography due to schedule and set mission objectives.
I started out setting up the cameras and taking pictures according to my photographic flight plan. No matter how closely you looked, it was crater upon crater. It was interesting, but after about an hour, I'm thinking, it's kind of boring.
The moon might have been what the Earth looked like before life.
One of the most influential images of the 20th century almost didn't happen due to a combination of factors. First, the Earthrise photograph was never part of the official plan. NASA just wanted
photographs of something that was unusual. Close-ups of the far side of the moon, and the Earth was strictly secondary.
The photography budget for the mission was also limited, and the astronauts had to force the inclusion of cameras into the mission. The camera on board was not an ideal camera for capturing a picture of the Earth from that distance, and astronaut Anders only had a few seconds before Earth disappeared from view.
We had Hasselblad 70mm cameras with a magazine that held 200 exposures of thin-based film.
The primary objective of the Apollo 8 mission was to test the Command and System Module, or the CSM, of the lunar vehicle while in orbit in order to provide information for future landings on the moon. They were also on a recon mission on the moon. The Apollo 8 crew faced big technical hurdles on their way to the moon. Their rocket, the Falcon 1, had a history of problems which made them nervous.
As we came into the shadow of the moon, suddenly it was infinitely black, and I looked out and there were stars everywhere. And then as I looked out my side window, suddenly the stars stopped and there was this black hole.
Finding their way through space was like navigating a dense forest without a map. They had to rely on stars and complex instruments to stay on course. Communication with mission control was slow and unreliable. It was like sending a letter and waiting weeks for a single response.
And the hairs went up on the back of my neck. And then I realized that was the moon blocking out the stars. That was really black. And that brought up a animalistic feeling.
We were looking at a portion of the moon that human eyes had never seen before. The moon might have been what the Earth looked like before life.
Despite these challenges, the crew persevered. They were pioneers in a new era, testing the limits of human skill and the limitations of human technology.
We've been spending all these revolutions looking at the moon. Then as we come around this non-inviting place, we look up and there's the Earth. It's 240,000 miles away. It was small enough you could cover it with your thumbnail. And everything we held dear, our families, our country, everything we held dear was back on that blue planet.
Earthrise was a momentous shot. Astronaut Anders narrowly rushed and was able to capture a picture of planet Earth just seconds before it faded into oblivion for them. Anders was not even a dedicated photographer. It was Anders' quick thinking and skill that paved the way for the existence of Earthrise.
We had never had any discussion of taking an Earthrise picture before the flight or during the flight. And yet when we came over the moon on this flight, we looked up and there was this beautiful blue ball in the background. It all struck us immediately. Get that picture. This is the best picture we've got of the whole flight.
So the one overwhelming emotion that we carried with us is the fact that we really do all exist on one small globe. And when you get out 240,000 miles, it really isn't a very large Earth.
Unrelated strings of events, both planned and unexpected, led to the making of Earthrise, from advocacy of cameras and spacecraft to the accidental discovery of an era-changing camera. Not to forget the rebel astronauts forcing cameras onto spacecrafts and the individual initiative of William Anders.
I don't take much, philosophical, artistic credit for that. I just happened to be there, had the camera, wanted the color film, and took the picture.
The picture that Bill took of the Earth from Apollo 8 became sort of the trademark of the mission. And everywhere we went, we presented that photograph. All over Western Europe, all over the Soviet Union. It was sort of widely admired. I think people could identify with it because they were on that blue marble.
We went to the moon. We learned a lot about the moon. But most of all, we learned about a new way to look at the Earth.
Earthrise changed more than just how we see our planet. It showed us things we didn't know about our planet. Earthrise can be likened to a happy accident which changed the course of history. Just like how a war between the Medes and the Lydians was abruptly stopped by a solar eclipse, or like how a mathematical mistake led to the discovery of the New World. It serves as a reminder that in the grand vastness of space, our home planet Earth is but an insignificant little fragile sphere. With Earthrise, we now have an idea of how the aliens see us.
To see the Earth as it truly is, small and blue and beautiful in that eternal silence where it floats, is to see ourselves as riders on the Earth together, brothers on that bright loveliness in the eternal cold, brothers who know now that they are truly brothers.